Welcome to the 2021 Wilmington Spring Workshop.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending. Sorry about the snafu there earlier. I think I can make up a couple of extra minutes. This is actually a pretty short talk. It was Mark's idea for me to give this talk this year, so I didn't have to rack my brain starting January to figure out what to talk about. And as such, he has provided a summary slide at the end. So we both have a summary slide, and it was meant to spark a little bit of discussion, and that is severe weather staffing strategies. Now, I'm not a lead, I'm not a manager, so I did some outside of the box thinking and looked up a couple of things and wanted to throw a few ideas out there. The first hurdle normally is how many extra people do I think I need with an event? And my suggestions here are a little on the vague side because I like a shift to be fluent. And towards the end, Mark actually had some harder numbers. And, again, it's going to be up to the lead, and you're going to see that theme recurring several times, lead forecaster discretion. But, will just the M shift suffice? Who do you have in the M shift? Sometimes is a factor, but when an extra radar operator is needed, bigger outbreaks, significant, or my least favorite is when there's also a flooding threat, and it's kind of hard to have your procedures for monitoring flooding and your procedures monitoring severe weather. So sometimes we do one does one does the other. How much ground truth is coming in? Usually a function of the skill and the ability of the P shift, because I think that's kind of the person who gets stuck with that. If we don't have an extra person dedicated to it, it's great when we do, though. And how much weather's happening outside of the actual thunderstorms? Like, how hard are the taps? Do we have IFR visibility or clouds outside of the storms, and taps are just a nightmare? You might need an extra person just to do that. Mesoscale and analyst, another role that's not really often defined on their own. The P shift just kind of does that lifting. I talk about that in subsequent slides, my feelings about it. I think Steve Path even made a similar point a while back in either a meeting or a discussion. And a storm coordinator, or PIO, is usually reserved for pretty big events, in my opinion, like April 2011, because otherwise we just probably somebody else can wear that hat. If we have an extra person, we're probably dedicating them either to radar or ground truth. But an observation, and I love this map, but the color scheme is weird. The smaller your CWA, the hotter the colors. So all those guys out west that have such large CWAs are cooler greens. But here we are, ILM. I think we have, the fourth smallest CWA or something like that. And so, when I was new to being focal point, I would sometimes scratch my head. How often do we need 2 radar operators unless there is a hybrid severe or flooding event? Because we're only talking about 14 counties. How does somebody like, who's this, Paducah here with 50 some odd counties and 3 states, that's more of a CWA where I think 2 or sometimes 3 radar operators might be more prudent. And for that matter, the role of the meso analyst too, because outside of a sea breeze or a front, we don't often have tremendous variability across only 14 counties, with a CWA size smaller. But so that's number of people. But to me, the second hurdle, and this is probably where I start thinking more just outside of the box, is we all have different skill sets, and I don't pick on anybody in this presentation except for myself, of course. But do you have a radar expert? We'll put them on radar, right? But always? What if we have a data mining or ground truth expert? Is that what we want them doing on that shift? Steve's working the event. He's the PIO, right? We putting all of the aces into places. Well, again, that kind of depends on the event and who's working and how they're feeling. If you always put the aces in their places, like I'll pick on myself, me on radar versus working the ground truth desk, something I just don't like doing and I'm not very good at. What benefits? That means that the aces all get better at doing their specialty, and the people who aren't good at stuff never get better at it. And so we have an office full of specialists. And this is nothing unique to us being in the weather business. That I could picture this in any business setting. Whereas if you put people a little bit out of their comfort zone sometimes, not in the hopes that they fail, but just that so we cultivate better rounded employees, jack of all trades. And again, it kind of depends on who you're having. If the P shift comes in, Maybe they can work radar because, for years since I've been here at Wilmington, we've struggled with how to get leads working radar more. So maybe the P shift takes over the short long from the M when it comes in. But it depends on when storms fire. If it's an earlier event and the M's already knee deep in radar when the P arrives, that might not be a good time to switch hats. Another example, you're the shift supervisor and you've got a radar person coming in, maybe like me, and I have a terrible headache. I'm probably not going to shine that day. You've got a ground truth wizard working, and they've got things going on. They're distracted at home or work or whatever. Your TAF expert rolls in, and they've only had 2 hours of sleep, either self-induced or whatever. Or I didn't brief you on the P shift about the severe thunderstorms, and there they are at 2 a.m. These are all more out of your control things that are going to pop up and probably going to be handled at the last minute. And not to get ahead of myself too much, but a theme that you'll see on the summary slides and Mark's too is it's probably better to over prepare to prevent such things happening like that. This is kind of a neat little graph. It shows how, like, early on in the events where adrenaline kind of takes over and the stress levels increase, studies have shown that your performance in mental acuity actually increases for a little bit, but then you reach a point of diminished return. Either the stress takes over or you just get physically tired, or maybe it's Riegelwood, it's in the middle of the night and you're tired anyways. And so we've often kicked around these unwritten guidelines about 6 hours on radar might be a little bit much, maybe even 4. And I put an asterisk there getting ready for this talk, talking to Reed one day. He pointed out that an FAA study shows that sometimes working an intense radar job, either warning on storms or routing planes, after 2 hours, and you start to lose mental acuity. So keep that in mind, but also the bullet above the asterisk, everybody's different. I personally would still rather work on radar for a long shift before I get burnt out. But that's another thing that the lead just has to be aware of is, how are the people doing, whether they're the quote unquote expert or not. Are they tired? Are they showing signs of fatigue? Are they making mistakes? And so I think inherently we all know that the warning forecast position tends to be the highest SA level, but also the green arrow shows the higher stress level. So next down, the near term and probably TAF person, that can be pretty stressful. The H shift we all know is pretty darn busy. And then there's always somebody floating around in operations on most shifts working the longer term desk, and that usually, they're a little bit more unplugged in a relative sense. And so sometimes when there are shift changeovers, or the fact that the journeys, or whatever we're called now, our shifts are pretty offset from leads, we have a new person coming in roughly every 3 or 4 hours. And this is a little complicated to look at first, but let's say the M shift has been working radar and the P shift comes in and the M shift is kind of shot or having a bad day. That's a good time where the P shift should take over radar. And again, a lot of times a lead is working the H, and so I think it's the H that might have to be monitoring how the M shift is doing, because the P shift isn't going to walk in and go, oh, well, Mark's having a bad day on radar. And then because the S shift comes in at 7:30, sometimes there's this opportunity to do this sort of jockeying some more. We've often talked about doing that, but when there's a radar event kind of ongoing, I know it can be a little unsettling. Like we usually like to have a person, I think, in the office for 30 minutes or more before they hop on the radar, because they have to get in touch with the mesoscale, either in doing it on their own, kind of wearing the meso hat for a little bit, or maybe they'll get like a nice thorough briefing from the previous shift. Wrapping up here, it's a case-by-case matter. Err on the side of having a person or two extra. I think that worked out great the other night for Brunswick County. But, try to be a little bit proactive. Everyone's mental and physical state, assess that. Morale. I mean, geez, it wasn't that many years ago when nobody wanted to work on their days off because of what was going on in the office. And try to weigh your skill sets versus the number of people that you have. Sometimes you can get away with fewer if everybody's doing what they love. Sometimes there's a bit of a training opportunity and you can pull people out of their comfort zone. Again, not in the hope that they fail, but just that maybe they'll get some of that radar rust off, or their ground truth digging rust off, or maybe there's a great opportunity to pair up an expert with somebody who's a little bit more medium in their skill sets, and that way we can bring the office up as a whole. So that was my summary slide. Mark's he got a little bit more specific with the numbers. I like his bullet here during watches enhanced. Probably have 2 extra people, and maybe sometimes 3 plus. But I think one of his bullets that I had earlier as well is it's probably hard or impossible to over prepare and have too many people, because you can start sending them home in even a stepped fashion. And, I don't think they're going to begrudge you for it. They're going to get a little overtime or comp time. And if it was a good event to work, so be it. And if it didn't pan out, well, then they got a little comp time or overtime for free. But like I said, Mark did want this to have a quick discussion. And I say quick because we're going to have a very long brown bag at the end probably, and I don't want the meeting to go too over. So does Mark or anybody have any comments or questions?
Yeah, Mark, I can go. Or go ahead, Carl. Go ahead.
No, I just had one comment and one question. My comment was, don't forget, just wasn't too many years ago that, bare bones staffing was considered 3 people, 2 forecasters and an HMT intern on the public service desk. And for the last several years, we've made do with only 2 people for bare bones staffing. So when you think in terms of bringing in extra people, if you bring in 1 person during an afternoon or evening event, you're just back up to 3 people, which used to be normal operating mode just a few years ago. So that definitely helps, but 2 people on an evening event is probably a lot better if it's a significant event. But the other question I had was on your second to last slide. You had a graphic with a bunch of yellow arrows pointing from P's to M's to S's. If you can just explain that, I didn't get what you were showing there, and that's all I've got.
It's okay, and I did probably forget to mention in one of the previous slides, I had a bullet going something like, remember, we used to have a second Q shift. So thank you for pointing that out. This shows where by default, the M shift is kind of working the radar. And it gives an idea of if that's the highest stress level position, if you're going to jockey things around, you might want to put them all the way down to the lowest. So it shows where they go to just doing grids and maybe longer term grids. Just something that's a little less stressful. Whereas the P, being the freshest body, can go into the higher, maybe work the radar. But again, it depends on how hot and heavy the event already is. And then you're fast forwarding a little bit in time to 7:30. What do you do with that S shift? Because I guess by default, that person is supposed to be radar. But a lot of times the event is winding down.
Okay, I get it. I wasn't making the connection between the graphic on the left and the arrows on the right, but I see it now.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep. No, good question.
Yeah, Mark, and just a couple comments on that last slide. I think one of the themes of your talk, which you articulate really well, is that there's no perfect clean box for this stuff to fit into. It's all event dependent, and it's going to take judgment calls, which I think is really important and gives us flexibility. That being said, I thought it would be good just for things like the SDM to update our guidance, and show some bare minimums and recommendations with the asterisk on it that there's some gray in here and every event is different. So the plan with this right here is I'm going to circulate this to lead forecasters and things like that. Try to get some feedback over the next week or so, with the goal to update the SDM with some version of this after it's gone through a round of feedback. And that's really all I had to say. But I appreciate you going over this and some of the great points you made, Mark.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Mark. Yeah, this is Reed. One thing I hope everybody got stressed is, and I won't say who it was, Jordan, but not picking on you. Jordan worked 11 hours on the radar around Christmas. I know we were short-staffed and stuff, but please, I know, Jordan, you may have loved it, but 11 hours is it's too much for anybody, even Superman Jordan Baker. So please be really aware of that.
I think you and I were on radar for one of the tropical systems of '04 Reed, and yeah, we felt like our eyes were going to fall out. We're still having fun, but I think that stress graphic that I show you, the skill just goes down, even if you're still doing the duty that you want to be doing.